Before we get into today's episode, let me tell you about one of my personal favorite podcasts. I'm talking about Assorted Goods. Assorted Goods is a deep dive into sort of everything, past and present. You'll find episodes on the history of lawn care, which I promise is more interesting than it sounds. Or, more recently, the Great Resignation, why so many people are leaving their jobs. Even though this show is independently produced, it feels and sounds just like a big network or NPR show. Follow the link in my show notes to subscribe to Assorted Goods today to make sure that you don't miss out on any upcoming episodes. Everybody loves cats, right? Actually, that's not true at all. According to the most recent data available, only about 25% of people self-identify as cat people, while over 60% identify as dog people. That's a pretty substantial gap, and I get it. Think of cats in our popular culture. Grumpy Cat, Garfield, Scratchy from The Simpsons, perfunctory, petulant, and petty. But before you feel too bad for the cats of today, let me tell you this is probably the best they've had it since ancient Egypt. My name is Josh, and this is Obscure History. Now, when I say that cats have an interesting history, I completely understand if you roll your eyes. Like, I know, if you're a big enough nerd, anything can be interesting, but I truly believe that the history of cats is actually really fun to study. Today we have cats all over the place. They've made their way into every habited continent and seem to have found a fairly respectable place in society. House cats here in the US, and I assume most of the Western world, get to enjoy a luxurious life. They sit idly indoors, play with toys, lounge in inconvenient places, stretch when necessary, and when the weight of their comfortable lives gets too unbearable, they can escape reality by taking a bump of catnip and really expanding their consciousness. I mean, I'm not sure that life could really get any better for them. They don't even have the same expectations that dogs have. Like, when you've got a dog, you expect it to do tricks or play games or give you affection. Cats get a hall pass on all of it. The only expectation we have for cats is that they hang out and occasionally acknowledge our existence. As one of the 25% of people who self-identify as a cat person, I know this is true for my cat, Garfunkel. He is so lazy he barely exists, and I love him for it. But this was not always so. If anything, this generation of domesticated cat is living more like their ancient ancestors than their great-grandparents. Long ago in ancient Egypt, cats were worshipped and adored. This is something you probably already knew. To our knowledge, Mafdet, the Piercer of Darkness, was the first cat-headed deity in the ancient Egyptian pantheon. In fact, Mafdet is traced back to the first dynasty. Mafdet was said to protect from scorpions, snakes, and was the deification of legal justice. It is important to note, though, that Mafdet was depicted with the fur of a cheetah. In the second dynasty, we see Bastet appear. Bastet is probably the most recognizable of the Egyptian cat deities. It was said that Bastet was a fierce warrior goddess, a protector of Ra, and a defender of the pharaoh. Though originally depicted as a lioness or a woman with a lion's head, by about 1000 BCE, Bastet was depicted as a domesticated house cat and was believed to be the deification of pregnancy, childbirth, and fertility. And it was around that time that cats really found their place in the world. Some experts suggest that cats domesticated themselves by forming a mutualistic relationship with the ancient Egyptians, while others suggest that it was the ancient Egyptians that forced small cat breeds to domesticate because of their innate cultural affection for them. Either way, by about 1000 BCE, we can observe domesticated cats as a household companion and an object of worship and affection. Cats were even occasionally mummified by their owners and buried with intricate and luxurious artifacts as a symbol of their owner's status and love for their furry companion. As the Roman Empire began blending its borders with the Egyptian Empire, cats eventually made their way to Europe. Allegedly, the export of cats was forbidden due to their status as holy symbols, but an adoring Roman merchant stole some and brought them back home. But again, that's just a bit of historical hearsay. What isn't historical hearsay is that once cats made their way to Europe, however it really actually happened, their luck basically ran out. We don't really have a great historical record of domesticated cats in medieval Europe, but we do have a few details. According to a surprisingly well-written article on Affinity Pet Care, there is hardly any historic register of cats until much later, and most refer to individuals who had cats. For example, Saint Agatha, also known as Saint Cat, passed away in the year 251 CE. February 5th is her day in the saint's calendar, and it is said that she appeared in the shape of a cat on that date. Saint Jerome, who passed away in the year 420 CE, had a cat who was occasionally represented in paintings of the saint, instead of the lion, according to legend. Pope Gregory I had no possessions, but he did have a cat as his loyal companion. Before I continue, I've got an important question to ask you. Have you ever made a big mistake? Like a real whopper? Like a mistake so big you didn't even fully realize the consequences until much later on? I'm sure that you have. I think we probably all have done something like that. And honestly, maybe it wasn't even your fault. Maybe you got some bad information. Maybe somebody led you astray and you found yourself mixed into some drama that was unintended. Well, when I was in high school, I got my wisdom teeth taken out, but they were all completely impacted, and as such, I had to go to an oral surgeon to get them taken out. Because I couldn't have this particular procedure done in my small hometown, I had to go to Boise, Idaho, which was a few hours away. I remember getting into the office, watching Finding Nemo on the TV in the lobby, and then I remember getting prepped for the surgery, counting backwards from 10, making it to 7, and then waking up completely disoriented, thinking that I was at a Wendy's. Of course, the typical post-wisdom teeth shenanigans ensued. I got into a bitter argument with my mom and then posted the following on my Facebook. Thin FFD, silly here, lol, me, teeth E, argon, ... Mon gave me my CLLE phone because she thinks I'm silky. I then somehow convinced my mom to let me play drums at a basketball game only a couple hours after that operation. I don't actually remember playing the drums or attending the game. I only vaguely remember standing outside my high school with my friends. When I awoke the next morning, my face was in intense pain. Now, ignoring the directions of my surgeon and the warnings of my mother was a big mistake. A particularly painful mistake. Not only could I have seriously hurt myself or somebody else while attending a public event completely incoherently, I developed dry socket, which was so much worse than the operation itself. And further, to treat the dry socket, I was put on a disturbing amount of opioids, which naturally came with its own consequences. I caused myself months of misery all because of one dumb mistake. Maybe that seemed like a complete aside, but I promise it's relevant to the episode. You see, because of one man's big mistake, the fates of millions of people and cats were doomed. But before we get into that, we need to stop and pay the bills, so hang tight for about 90 seconds. We'll be right back with one of the most absurd and strangely disturbing tales I think I've ever told on this show. As we've been in the throes of a global pandemic for well over a year, things can feel pretty bleak. But sometimes when I feel down about having to wear a mask all day, I think about the Black Plague. Honestly, I could probably write for hours about the Black Plague since it takes up a giant portion of European history. I mean, in about 1330 CE, we see the Black Death pop up in southwestern China. Then it made its way to Constantinople and Eastern Europe from there. It arrived in Italy in about 1347, and from there it ravaged Europe for a couple centuries. We've got the Plague of Paris in 1466, the Great Plague of London in 1665, and the Plague of the Balkans in 1770. And in between those big plagues were other big plagues. It was a constant fear for medieval Europeans. By the time the Black Plague had run its course, an estimated 75 to 200 million lives had been lost in some of the most horrifying ways imaginable. And that's just what we know for sure. Some scientific data suggests that the bacteria that causes the Black Plague might have contributed to the Neolithic decline thousands of years before the plague slithered its way into Europe through port cities and siege warfare. The legacy of the bubonic plague might be far larger than we could ever really truly understand. And it continues to this day. It would be nice to think that we figured it out and got rid of the plague, but we didn't. At least not really. We got cleaner, and we figured out some great methods for preventing infection, like soap, plumbing, and quarantining people who are ill, but we still don't exactly know why the plague subsided. The working theory is that we got cleaner, our immune systems adapted, and the bacteria naturally got weaker, but again, that's just the popular theory. Truthfully, about 12 hours before I wrote these very words, a house cat in Colorado tested positive for the bubonic plague. Now, it's important to note that the primary vector for transmitting the Black Death was the oriental rat flea. This particular variety of flea feasts primarily on rodents like rats and weasels, but can bite humans and other mammals if they are placed in the position to do so. And that's how the plague spread. One person got a flea bite, their insides turned into Oregon smoothies, and then everyone that they had come into contact with also died within just a few short hours. It's really shocking to me that one of the most consequential and defining events on our human timeline was primarily caused by something so tiny. This little flea had much greater access to humans in medieval Europe than your 21st century imagination might initially believe, though. People in the 14th century lived in a disgusting cesspool. I mean, let me be clear about this before the real medieval enthusiasts come after me. It probably wasn't as bad as you're thinking right now, but it was still abhorrent compared to our modern standards. Medieval cities were twisting mazes of narrow streets, generally speaking, and they presented a host of problems. Places like communal wells, baths, and other sources of water served as a breeding ground for disease, especially considering the fact that people's chamber pots were occasionally dumped into open sewers that leached into those very water sources. While people in medieval Europe did pay close attention to removing lice from their hair and clothing, they were richly infected with parasites like ringworm, and they didn't really understand what they were or how to get rid of them. In addition to that, citizens in medieval Europe had very narrow diets, which prompted their immune systems to be particularly weak. This meant that even non-plague diseases spread rapidly, and the general lack of private space among the working class basically meant that if one person got a miscellaneous stomach bug or strange seasonal cough, most people in their vicinity would get it as well. This is compounded by the fact that for most of European history, society was sort of a have and have not economy. The very few that had kept their resources close and married their cousins to keep their wealth in the family, and the majority of people were a proletariat have-not caste. They were basically held under the thumb of the rich with no prospect of improving their station in life. And certainly I'm not speaking for every medieval city in every country in every region. I need to make that distinction because medieval history nerds can be aggressive. But you can take that information as a pretty good generalization about life in medieval Europe. They tried their best with what resources and knowledge they had at the time. Essentially what I'm getting at is medieval cities were prime targets for rats. Rats that carried fleas. Fleas that carried the Black Plague. So you would think that keeping animals like cats around would be wise, to reduce the number of mice, and thereby the number of fleas. Well, this did not happen, and it's largely due to the work of two men, Conrad von Marburg and Pope Gregory IX. It was the year 1233, and the world was scary. Illnesses were mysterious, healthcare was deranged, the Mongols had taken Kievan Rus, and the Holy Roman Empire was at war with the papacy again. To combat the darkness in the world around it, the Vatican went on various crusades in Europe, seeking to wipe out any potential heretical threat to the cross. One of these papal inquisitors, employed by Gregory IX, was a man named Conrad von Marburg. We don't know much about his early life, but we do know that he was intelligent, or at least learned. He participated in a crusade in southern France as a young man, and he was friends with Pope Innocent III. After his crusading days were over, he accepted a commission from Archbishop Siegfried II to chase heretics out of Germany. And in this job, he really showed his true colors. He is said to have been ruthless. He accepted nearly any accusation as truth, treated suspects as guilty until proven innocent, and would stop at nothing to get confessions from those he deemed suspicious. He would entice them to oust other heretics, even if they were devout Catholics. He procured these tainted confessions through gruesome and frequent torture. Even worse, he had a great ability to pull people into his madness. He was often accompanied by a mob of religious fanatics who sought only to destroy those at the end of Conrad von Marburg's deadly gaze. And nobody was safe. He went after commoners, merchants, priests, and even the nobility. Anybody could be a heretic in the eyes of Conrad von Marburg, and he seemed to believe that most people were. And if they wouldn't confess, he would burn them at the stake. And many were. His zeal did earn him the respect of the papacy, though. So when he sent a report detailing the activities of a satanic cult operating in his area to the Pope, it was taken seriously. As the account and subsequent papal bull are in Latin, I've had to rely heavily on translation and commentary to piece this together. This wonderful excerpt comes from an article by Natasha Sheldon for History Collection. The account began by describing the initiation of novices to the coven. Firstly, they are greeted by an abnormally large frog or toad whose behind they must kiss. Then, they must kiss the lips of a man of fearful pallor and thinness whose task was to suck out every last remnant of faith in the Catholic Church from their soul. The novice then feasted with the rest of the congregation, after which they assembled to pay homage to a black cat which emerged from a kind of statue which normally stands in the place where these meetings were held. The whole coven was required to kiss the cat's behind, and once they had done this, a wild sexual orgy occurred. Once the lights came back on, from a dark corner the figure of a man emerges. This man was Lucifer, who the whole company firmly believed to have been wronged by God. As was to be expected of a former angel, the upper part of his body from the hips upward shines as brightly as the sun. However, his fall from grace was encapsulated in his lower body, where his skin was coarse and covered with fur like a cat. This account of debaucherous Satanism sent chills down the spine of Pope Gregory IX, and he knew that something had to be done. So he informed the public in an official papal bull titled In Vox Rama. Now, it's entirely true that he did not directly order his followers to kill cats, but it appears that they inferred as much on their own when he alleged that Lucifer himself was half cat, and that cats were the idols of Satanists and witches. As Sheldon also notes, no one can say for sure how many cats were killed because of the association made between them and witchcraft by the Vox and Rama. However, historian Donald Engel believes that the Vox acted as a death warrant for the cat. Indeed, the belief that the torture or killing of cats could break spells continued across northern Europe. Denmark's Fastelvan, held to the start of Lent, was based on the premise that for spring to begin, evil had to be banished. That evil came to be neatly personified in the form of black cats that were beaten to death to purge the new season of evil spirits. Elsewhere in Europe, the legacy of cat killings passed into folk practices. Cat burning became a favorite medieval pastime in France, where cats were suspended over fires in cages, or doused and set alight, even chased on fire through the streets by cat chasers. In Belgium, it was the custom to hurl cats from the belfry of local churches and then set them on fire during the Festival of Cats, or Kattenstoot. This cruel practice continued until 1817. Although the Kattenstoot continues to this day, it involves stuffed cats instead. Now, while we cannot make any definitive claims about the consequences of this war on cats, I think that we can make an educated summary. Here it is. Cats ate mice. Mice carried fleas. Fleas that mostly live on mice and also carry the plague. A couple hundred years of religious fanatics killing cats because they were thought to be somehow the bearer of the soul of the devil himself at least diminished the population of cats in Europe by some amount, which in turn allowed some amount more of mice to live and more fleas to come in contact with humans and thereby spread the plague. We can never, ever know how great or minor these actions were, but I think it's completely reasonable to say that they did make an impact. And this wasn't the last time that the Pope attacked cats. 2 centuries after Pope Gregory IX issued the Vox and Rama, Pope Innocent VII issued a very similar anti-cat papal bull wherein he encouraged cats to be destroyed as they represented the embodiment of Satan. And again, we see the plague raging through Europe at this time. And one more time, just to set the record straight, we'll never know how much better the plague would have been if people weren't actively destroying cats. But we can say with some certainty that it couldn't have been worse. In the end, millions of people died. Millions of cats probably also died, but life finds a way. Today, both humans and cats are experiencing an unparalleled renaissance. Our populations have never been bigger, and we've never been more comfortable. Cats are brought into our homes and are loved dearly, and humans have certainly come a long way from the disgusting, filth-covered lives we lived only a few short centuries ago. Conrad von Marburg was mysteriously killed after trying to get a nobleman burnt at the stake. The place where he was killed was marked by a simple stone. It is said that this stone has been a meeting place for Satanists, vandals, and hooligans alike over the years. They tried to erect a statue of Marburg near the location, but local kids pelted it with rocks until it broke. It was eventually replaced by a generic fountain in memoriam, which I'm sure has also been vandalized nearly constantly since Marburg's death. As it turns out, being a ruthless crusader might make you friends with the Pope today, but it will make you an enemy of the people for all eternity. Thank you so much for listening, guys. I seriously appreciate it so much. Fun announcements here at the end. If you liked Thursday Footnotes and you are sad that it disappeared for a couple weeks, then I have some fun news for you. Thursday Footnotes will be back. However, this one might be just a little different than the others. Perhaps instead of my 5-4-3-2-1 style format that I've been working with, I'm going to maybe change it up just a little bit and have maybe an interview or two. I'm sure that some of you will be very interested to hear all of the gruesome details of my wisdom tooth mistake story. And who better to tell it than some of my closest friends and or my mom. So maybe I'm going to work that in. Who knows? Maybe I just go back to the 5-4-3-2-1 format for this episode, but I don't know if I can work something out to maybe tell the full scope of that horrible story. Maybe you guys would be interested in finding out, because there's more to that story, I'm sure. I only remember bits and pieces of it. I also didn't learn my lesson immediately. I'm sure that we'll get into this on Thursday, but I continued going to events in the days after my wisdom teeth were out. I just went to these events on pain pills, and I'm sure made terrible choices then as well. Okay, as always, if you want to reach out to the show, that would be great. All the People Pod on Twitter, because it won't let you change your username. Obscure History Podcast on Instagram, because Instagram does let you change your username. Or obscurehistorypod@gmail.com. What I would really especially love is if you wrote in with your music. I think that would be great. I would love to feature some independent musicians on this show. I've already featured The Mileage from Denmark, and I think it'd be great to feature some more people who listen. I think that would be super cool. If you don't make music of any kind, still write in. I love to hear from you guys. Also, you know that I always say that these episodes are brought to you in part by Earbuds Podcast Collective and Indie Drop-In Network, and that is true, especially this week, because you can hear me talking about this podcast and some of my other favorite history podcasts on the Earbuds podcast. It's called Feedback with Earbuds. You can find it on all of your major podcasting platforms. And Ariel and I had a really fun little chat about my show, about some shows that I listen to that I also enjoy. I've been pretty open about trying not to listen to history shows all that much so that I don't copy anybody's good material, but I do give some of my top picks in that episode of Feedback with Earbuds. So I'm going to link to that in the show notes if you want to get over there. Let Ariel know that I sent you. Ariel, let Ariel know that I sent you. That would be super rad. Also, indiedropin.com for all of your independent podcasting needs. I don't know that I've ever explained how that works, so let me do that real quick before I forget. Indie Drop-In has, I think, 4 main shows. They've got true crime, scary time, comedy, and there's another one that I think. Maybe there's one on its way, but I'm not sure. So basically what you do is you subscribe to like True Crime by Indie Drop-In, right? And then every week, Greg sends you an independently produced podcast in that category. I believe at some point in the future, one of my more true crimey episodes is going to appear on True Crime by Indie Drop-In, which makes me super, super excited because Greg is one of the most solid guys out here in the podcast industry, and appearing on that network is kind of a big deal for my show. So definitely go check him out. The more that you guys check him out, the better it is for not only my show, but also for Greg as well. It's a very mutualistic experience here. Working on the website. There's a merch store there. If you're into that, a portion of every proceed goes to UNICEF, as always, because my kids shouldn't be the only ones in the world that live a very comfortable life. Anyways, with that, I don't really have any more announcements. Like I said, please reach out. I love to hear from you guys, especially if you've got music that you would like me to feature. I can't promise you that it'll change your whole life, but I've got about 2,000 people that really like to listen to this show, and I'm sure they'd really like to listen to you too. Anyways, I've got to go to work tomorrow. It will be an adventure, and I need to go sleep so that I can be fully ready for the adventure. All right, I'll talk to you guys later. See you on Thursday this week.
Still asking why we're here, but the question is wrong. morose. There is no